Hello everyone, my name is Brian Townsend and I'll be conducting your webinar today. I've also got Jeff McCartney here with me and he's going to be answering questions that you may have throughout the webinar. We'll get started here in a minute. We'll just give us a little bit more time for people to show up to the webinar and then we'll get rolling. But before we do, today's kind of a little testing scenario for us. Today we just kind of want to show you what you can do with After Effects, give you an overview of what it's used for and how it can actually help you out. It's not essential if you're using KeyShot and you want to do animation, but if you want to take things to the next level, add a little bit of sweetener to your animations, After Effects is certainly the place where you'd want to be doing that. So like I said, we'll just give us a couple more minutes and then we'll get rolling. Okay, I think the room's filling up pretty good. So before we get started, I want to talk to you a little bit about what After Effects is actually used for. Some of you may be familiar with it. Some of you might have no idea what it's actually used for. So I'd like to just give you a brief overview. One of the general things I think you can take from this is for your internal presentations, for animations that you're sharing just within your team, you probably wouldn't need to go into After Effects for. But if you are preparing for a final presentation or you have something that you want to show as a final version to a client, then After Effects is a place that you can go and put these little finishing touches on your animations and really just improve the quality. So it can be used for things like title screens. It can be used to fade things in and out. So if you have an animation that starts, maybe you don't want it to just show up on the first frame. Maybe you want it to fade from a black screen or to fade from a white screen. You can do that. You can do things like adding glows, which we'll be doing today. You can add motion blur, another thing that we'll be doing today. You can change colors. You can do things like play videos on screens. You can also do things like add music or add narration to videos. So if you're trying to narrate, and explain how a product is actually designed to function, and you want that narration to play along with your animation, After Effects is where you would go about that. So before we dive into the really big project today, I just kind of want to give you an overview of the After Effects interface, and we'll do some simple things. Like if you look here in this scene, all we're going to be doing is I have a logo that I'm going to use for a title screen. So the logo fades in, animates up to the corner, and I have this animation that I rendered out from KeyShot, and it's just a simple laptop opening, and on there we have a video playing. So this is a prime example of what can be done with After Effects. So like I said, you got the logo that fades in, moves up to the top corner. Also the laptop animation fades in from white. And when it's all done playing, this screen fades to white. Okay, so to accomplish something like this, first thing you're going to want to know is how to get your footage into After Effects. So you can do that one of two ways. You can go to File, Import, and you can select File. And in this particular case, I have this laptop open. If I select the first frame in the list, I can import it as a TIFF sequence, and that will import it as a movie. Okay? This says it has an unlabeled alpha channel. You're going to want to just go ahead and set it to pre-multiplied. Okay, so that puts it in the project window. The project window is basically any elements that you have inside After Effects. You can have footage, you can have logos, you can have audio. All that is stored up here. Then down here you have your timeline. This shows any elements that you have in your scene. And then your preview window is where it's all played back. So if I grab my time slider here, you can see all the elements that I have, and it plays right up here. You also have a preview window where if you click this play button, it will load all your effects and things into RAM. and you can see this little green line filling up, and it will basically cache your movie so that it can play it back in real time. Okay, so to start out, I'm going to go ahead and clear out my timeline here, and we'll just start from scratch on this. And the first thing I'm going to want to do is create a new solid layer. A solid layer is just a simple background. So I'll press Control-Y, which is going to pull up my solid settings. The other way you can do that, you can go to Layer, New, and select Solid. And all this is going to be is a solid color. Now, one important thing to understand about After Effects and the timeline is if I scale something down, this basically limits the duration that this element is displayed on screen. So if I want it to start at 0, 0, 0, I'll line that up with 0. So that starts at the very beginning of time. And notice when I move my time slider and I get to the end, it's cut off. That's because this layer is only meant to occupy the amount of time that I've set it for. If I want to increase that, I can just set it all the way down to the end. Okay. Next, I have the KeyShot icon, and all we want to do is basically fade that in. So if I drag and drop this down into my timeline, I can set that on top. Okay. And it has an alpha channel, so the background will show behind it. Okay, the next thing is this is too big. So how I'm going to fix that is I'm going to adjust the scale of this. You can do that one of two ways. You can grab the corner of that and scale it down. If you hold Shift, it will scale it proportionally. Or you can press the S key when this layer is selected, and that will pull up the scale properties. Okay. The next thing we want to do is basically just keyframe this logo's opacity. So I'll press T, and that's going to pull up the opacity property. I set opacity keyframe on it just by clicking the stopwatch there. This basically says at this point in time the opacity is going to be 100%. If I make that 0, the logo goes away. If I move the time slider down to 2 seconds and increase the opacity, this animates a logo fade. So here's how you can basically include your company's logo, or maybe the company you're doing work for, you can include their logo before the start of your animation. Again, if you want to sweeten things up a bit for a final presentation. Okay, so the next thing we need to do, we already imported our tiff sequence. So those were our rendered frames out of KeyShot. And if I drag those from the project window into the timeline, here they are. Okay, now one of the things that you will notice about this is that its duration is only 24 frames. So once it starts and ends, this laptop goes away. Okay, so there's one really great trick that you can do to basically have this stay on screen for a little longer. So if I right click on this, select time, and enable time remapping, it's going to allow me to extend this layer out. Now there's no more animation, but that means the laptop is just going to sit there on screen. And that way we can put a video on the screen while it sits there. Okay. The other thing we wanted to do was keyframe the position of the KeyShot logo and move it up to the corner. So I'll show you how to do that. So there are some really good hotkeys in After Effects that you'll probably want to get to know. One of the three that I use more often than others is going to be T for opacity, P for position, and S for scale. So all we're going to do is keyframe the KeyShot logo's position from the center of the screen up to the corner. So we'll move that up there. And here's what we have. Okay. Now the other effect that we had going on was this was supposed to scale down. So at the same point in time that I started keyframing position, I'm going to select the KeyShot icon, press S for scale, click the stopwatch, which records its scale at that point in time, and then by the time we get up to the corner, all I want to do is reduce the scale. Another useful shortcut key is if you press U, this will show you all the items that you have keyframed. Now in this particular case, my position and scale keyframes, their last keyframes don't exactly line up. So I can select any keyframe and move it in time so that the scale and the position both end at the same time. Okay, the other thing I wanted to do on this was show you how to add a video to this screen. So as far as adding videos onto screens that are moving, it's a little bit more challenging, and we may cover that later on in time depending on how useful you guys find these After Effects webinars. But what I'm going to show you today is just how to basically distort the video so that it matches this perspective and to fade it on as if this screen was turning on. So we have this space heater video, and if I just drag and drop that down into the timeline, that adds it to my scene here. Okay, so again, one of those really important keys to remember, S for scale, pulls up the scale properties for the space heater, and I can scale it down. Now right now it's not matching the correct perspective, so we'll go ahead and address that next. So there's a really cool effect that After Effects comes with. And if you go to the Effects menu, this shows all the After Effects that you can apply to any of your layers. And we will go down to Distort, and I will select Corner Pin. Okay, now Corner Pin gives you these little pins on the corner that you can match and distort your videos so that you can project them onto a screen. Okay. Another useful technique when you are trying to match this, I'm going to press T and drop the opacity of this layer a little bit. That way I can see the edges of the laptop frame and where the screen actually is. So you see on the areas that I don't have it matched up properly, you can see how it's kind of overlapping with the border. Anytime you have an effect applied to a layer, it will show up here in the Effects panel. So if I have a layer selected and an effect is applied to it, it will show right up here. So if I wanted to edit the corner pin effect, all I have to do is click it in the effects, and I can match this up. Now if you want to zoom in to work on layers, you can do so by using the middle mouse wheel. So you can use that to zoom in. If you want to pan around, you can hold space, and that will pan around your layers. So you can really get in there and look close at what's going on. Okay, so at this point in time, we should have the laptop opening and the video playing on there. So what we want to do here, though, is keyframe its opacity, again, so that it feels like the screen is turning on. So in case you forgot that hotkey, it's T for opacity. And at the very beginning, we're going to set it to 0. I'm going to press the stopwatch. I'm going to move my time slider down in time. And I'm going to scale this up to 100%. So if you click on any of these values, if you click and hold and move the mouse left and right, it will adjust those values interactively. So that's a way that you can play videos onto screens. As I said, if you wanted to map that to the moving screen, it gets a little more complex, and won't be covering that today. One other really great thing that After Effects does that has always been something that takes a lot of time to render in 3D is motion blur. So there's a pretty good solution. It is a third-party plugin that comes with, or that does not come with After Effects. And I'll just go ahead and show you their website really quick. And that is Revision Effects. And this plugin that they have is called Real Smart Motion Blur, and it does a really, really amazing job of adding motion blur. If you try to do any animations where you have something that's, spins, full 360 degrees and, spins a lot of consecutive times, sometimes it can get a little weird looking if you don't have motion blur on it. So let me show you how easy it is if you have this Revision Effects plugin. So if I click my laptop layer, if we look at this lid, there's no motion blur at all. Every frame is perfectly clear. But if you go to Revision Plugins, and all I have to do is really select Real Smart Motion Blur, and it will blur that. And you can also increase it by increasing or decreasing the blur amount. Okay, so the last thing I want to do on this particular video is show you how to fade this back out to white. So it's going to be very easy. So what I can do is duplicate this white solid layer. So I can duplicate any layer by selecting it and pressing Control D. Now all I have to do is shift this to the very top. So this covers everything. This is my very top layer. And if I select T for opacity, press the stopwatch, and set that value to 0, that means it's, it's 100% transparent right now. And if I just move the time slider down and increase its opacity, it fades out. So really, with those steps, that can allow you to present your logo on screen, have an animation fade in, apply a bit of motion blur, add a video to a screen, and fade out your animation. So in a nutshell, those are some common tasks that After Effects is really good at creating. Okay, before we move on here, we do have a few polls set up for today. So we will go ahead and launch our first poll. And the first one is, have you ever used After Effects before? So go ahead and launch this, and feel free to answer any of your polls. Sometimes I use it. 63% I've never touched it. 78% I've never touched it. And 3% use it all the time. Okay, another poll I have for you guys that I'm curious about. So we'll go ahead and launch this one. How much need do you have to create animations of your CAD data? Okay, so in this group, 49% some, 28% moderate, and 18% large. And 5% of you have no need. Okay, so moving on here, let's jump into the next portion of this. And again, today's really mostly designed to show you guys what is possible with After Effects. And at the end of this webinar, you'll have a chance to give your feedback. And what we'll do from here out is we can provide more webinars that show KeyShot integration with other tools. And if you decide that that's not of interest to you, then we will stick to KeyShot webinars only. All right, so let's move on here. Okay, so knowing what I've already showed you before, I have this space heater inside my timeline, and it expands and closes. Now, what we want to do to this is add motion blur, and we want to isolate some areas here so that I can add glow to just these coils, and I want to also isolate the two-tone paints on here. That way we can change the paints without having to re-render, and that will apply it to the entire animation. Now, there is a little bit of setup that is involved in KeyShot to give yourself this sort of flexibility. And I'll show you what that is. So I have a few pre-rendered movies here. And if you look at this one, all this is a white flat shader against a black background. And it's of my entire animation. Now, for those of you who are familiar with what alpha channels are, maybe that can give you a little hint as to what this is used for. Let's take a look at some of the other mats that I have set up. So in here I have this coil mat. So all this is the coil is set to a white flat shader in KeyShot. Everything else is set to black. And what that's going to allow me to do is isolate just the coils so that we can add glow to just the coils. Same thing for the different colored paints. And it's important that you render the elements that you're not trying to isolate with the black shader, because otherwise these objects here wouldn't, you would see the whole object when actually they're obscured by the fan and the other elements in the animation. But I'll show you here in KeyShot how you go about setting that up. Okay, so here's the initial animation that we had. And what I'm going to want to do is just save this out as space heater, and we'll call this initial mat. Okay. Let's try that one again. Okay. So what you essentially want to do here, if you are trying to render out these mats and basically to isolate certain areas, first thing is turn off ground shadows. You've already rendered out your animation. You have your ground shadow. All we're concerned with is basically isolating certain areas. So what I want to do here, I'll just do the entire space heater. And I'll go ahead and select everything. And I'm going to right-click on it and say Link Material. That makes everything the same material. And all I want to do with this is next right-click on it and say Edit Material, and I'll change this over to a flat shader. From there, I'll make it pure white. And the next thing I'm going to do is set the background color to pure black. Okay. So what that does for you is that creates a really nice alpha channel of just the heater. And I'll show you what we can do with that, how we can essentially subtract our ground shadow from that, and that will give you a basic understanding of how we'll be isolating the other elements in that animation, like the coils and such. Okay. So, just open this up here. And right here, all we have is just our space heater. So the scene we just set up in KeyShot is just the mat. So if I bring that into After Effects, here's what we end up with. We have this, white animation that just sits over the top of everything else. And After Effects has a really cool feature for subtracting other things. And because this is made of pure black and pure white, After Effects has this track map feature that will allow you to say, okay, use the luminance of this image, so the bright white areas, and use it as an alpha channel. So what I did there is I said, okay, everything that's white, that's all I want you to show. And notice what happened is that all the ground shadows, the ground illumination, all that went away because we subtracted everything that is not pure white. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, and as we do this a couple more times, it should make even more. Okay, but instead of isolating the entire space heater, let's isolate the coils. So if we look at that coil map that I had set up, all it is just the coils. So if we lay that over the top of this space heater, and basically set this track matte to Luma matte. All we have are the coils. And what that'll allow us to do is add glow just to those elements. So what I'll do, actually one other thing I want to mention about the track mattes is for the track matte to work, the white layer, the white and black layer, needs to be hidden. So After Effects does that automatically for you once you set your track matte. And how it works is you have your initial render, then you have your matte on top, select your matte mode, and it will take care of all the subtraction for you. Now, if I take the original space heater animation and I drop it below all of these, what we actually have is the coils by themselves sitting on top of there. So what you can do is take this, and for those of you who use Photoshop, if you are familiar with flattening layers, so a lot of times in Photoshop you'll have all these layers that work together, and once you are happy with your what you've set up, you can flatten them, and that basically consolidates everything onto a single layer. And that's what we're going to do right here with these two mattes. So we have the coils, and we have the layer that allowed us to subtract that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both of those, and I'm going to layer PreCompose. And I want to make sure that Move All Attributes into New Composition is selected. And what that does is that takes the matte. So I'm no longer dealing with two layers. Now I just have these coils completely separated by themselves. Okay. And what I can do with that is I can start to apply some sort of effect to make them start to glow. And the first thing we can do is go to Effect, Blur and Sharpen, and we'll do Fast Blur. And if I start to blur this, look what happens here. You can see we start to get that little glow effect going on. And the reason this isn't blurring the entire thing is because we separated the coils by themselves. If we applied the blur to just the space heater, look what we would end up with. We end up with the entire thing being blurred. So that's really the point of separating things out. The other thing you can do to really increase this effect a bit more is set things to add. So if you're familiar with the blend modes in Photoshop, you have the same blend modes in After Effects. So if you click right here, you'll see a lot of these are the same things that you'll find in Photoshop. And really, if After Effects seems a bit intimidating to you, I can definitely assure you that if you're comfortable in Photoshop, the way I like to think of After Effects is it's Photoshop with a timeline. You'll find a lot of the similar features there. The main difference is you've got a timeline here to do a lot of other things with. So it's like Photoshop for video. Okay. Now that we have this already separated, let me show you what else we can do. Maybe we wanted to change the color of this glow. I mean, I think, it looks decently natural the way it is, but just for demonstration purposes, let me show you. If I go to Effect, Color Correction, Hue Saturation, you can start to change the color of this because things are separate and it's only affecting those coils. I can also duplicate that layer if I wanted to increase the effect of that blur, of the glow. All I'm doing is pressing Control D, and that duplicates this entire thing. Now to rename this so that we can keep things organized, I'm going to press Enter, and I'll call this Coil Glow. And we can also increase the amount of blur on this and expand that out. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do here, let's isolate one of these painted layers so that we can change the color of the space heater. So again, how we would do this is we would go into KeyShot, and if I wanted to change, say, this blue portion, I would set the blue portion to be pure white, and I would set everything else to be pure black, and I would use the flat material. So you would end up with something that looks like this. And the nice thing about these flat materials is they render out extremely fast. You can render out this entire animation in 5 minutes or less, and this is something around 200-300 frames. So essentially all you're doing is ensuring that just the blue painted portion is rendered as pure white. You would render out that animation, and once that was rendered, let me show you what you would end up with. You would end up with something like this, where you still have all these other components that you left flat black. That way they are actually obscuring this blue paint where they should. And what we would do is we would bring that into our main composition here. So we'll take this color 2 matte and we'll drop it in. And the other thing I need to do is duplicate my space heater. Let me also rename this. So space heater, and we'll call this base. This will be our base layer. And the other thing I want to do is duplicate this. Space heater, and we'll call this color 1 or color 2. And we're going to call this, which is our black and white layer, space heater. Well, we'll just keep it simpler, and we'll call it color 2 matte. Okay, and what I want to do is place this directly on top of my space heater layer. And again, if we go to this area right here that says track matte, and if we select the space heater layer, which is this right here, what we're going to do is we're going to cut out this blue paint. So we'll go in here and we'll select Luma Matte, Color 2 Matte. And there we go. So now what we can do is we will pre-compose that. So we've subtracted that blue layer. So again, just like Photoshop, think about it as flattening your layers. So we're going to get rid of having to deal with 2 layers for this blue paint, and we're going to condense it into 1. So we're just going to go to Layer, Pre-Compose, and we'll call it Color 2. Okay. Now, you will find that a lot of times you might want to rely on your blend modes as well for when you're trying to change colors of items. Let's go ahead and work on changing this color. So what we'll do is we'll select color 2 now that we've compiled it, and we'll go to color correction and we'll press hue saturation. Okay, and if I click this colorize box, you can see here I can increase the saturation of that. I can adjust the hue. I can increase or decrease the lightness of it. And if we run our timeline back here, you can see that it's actually animated. It's a bit saturated though, it doesn't exactly look real, but this kind of shows you what you can do with this sort of thing. Okay, next thing, let's go ahead and isolate the other color. So we'll go over there and we're just going to duplicate our space heater layer again. I'll hide all these other effects, so all we have is just our initial animation. I'm going to duplicate it, and what we would end up doing is we would go back into KeyShot and we would take all this tan area of the space heater. What we would do is assign the white flat shader to that, and then everything else would get a black flat shader. We would output that movie and we would have this right here. Okay, so again, if we just place that on top of our space heater layer, we go down to that space heater and we'll call this color 1. And what we're going to do is set that to the Luma matte. So all we've done is cut that out. So here's all we have. Okay. Now, so again, just like we've done before, let's flatten that layer. So we'll just go to Layer, PreCompose, and this will be color 1. And if we go to Effect, Color Correction, Hue Saturation, we can now colorize that layer. As I mentioned, sometimes you might want to experiment with using the blend modes. So if I set this to color or even multiply, a lot of times is a good one. So go to multiply. And that's sitting on top of my original layer. And you can do all sorts of things with the color. And that might give you a little bit more natural color correction because you're actually blending it with the initial render. So I mean, I have my initial render there and I'm blending the cutout color with the one below it. Let's bring back color 2. So here's color 2. And you probably noticed that I've been hiding a lot of layers, and it's the same way as in Photoshop. Like you have the little eyeball next to your layer and you can click it to enable or disable the layers. So color 2, let's also set that to multiply. And there you can see we kind of save ourselves quite a bit of time there if we wanted to show this in a few different color variations. And let's add in our coil glow. And so we have this in 2 different colors with the coil actually glowing. And it's all separate. So that allows you to do a lot of things. I mean, also what you can do is you can separate your shadows. So if you wanted to control the lightness or darkness of your shadows, you could separate that and do that as well. Okay, the other thing I wanted to show you here was how to add motion blur to this. So if we wanted to add motion blur, a great way to go about it is to use adjustment layers. Again, another feature that you'll find in Photoshop. And what an adjustment layer is it's a new layer, and basically anything that's under that layer will have any sort of effects or any sort of adjustments applied underneath there. So what I'll do is I'll go to Layer, New, Adjustment Layer, and in here what I can do is go back to that Real Smart Motion Blur. So if we go to Effects, Revision Plugins, and select Real Smart Motion Blur, what that will do is apply motion blur to this animation. And let's stop on a certain spot here so you can see the difference. A lot of times it's going to be subtle, but it will make a big difference. So you can kind of see when I turn it on and off where it's being shown and where it's not. And I'll go ahead and load that into RAM so we can play it back and see what it looks like. So there you see where the fan is spinning. If I disable the motion blur, you can see that it does add that nice bit of motion blur. And the nice thing is it does it automatically. So, I mean, once you apply it, you pretty much have it. If you want to increase the effect, you can do so by adjusting the intensity of it. And when you are working in After Effects, if you want to preview what all you've done so far, you can press Shift-P, or I'm sorry, you can press Shift and click this RAM Preview button. And what that's going to do is that's going to start to load all your frames into RAM. And as this little green line fills up here, it will show you your effect. Once it's all loaded into RAM, it will play it back in real time for you. And if you just press enter, it will play that back. And put it back together. Okay, so if you wanted to fade this out to black once it was done, all you would have to do is create another solid layer. So you could go Layer, New, Solid. You could set it to black. Press OK. And then again, just keyframe its opacity. So if you click here on the black solid, press T, click the stopwatch next to opacity, and set it to 0. That basically says it's going to be 0 at this point in time. And you move your time slider down and bring this up to 100%. That will fade it out to black once it's done. And you could fade that to any color you wanted. Now the other nice thing is you could also change backgrounds up. So if you wanted to, say, maybe make the background white, you could set a new white layer and drop it back there. And then now you have the thing against a white background. So really what this is all about, like I said, it's for adding a little bit of sweeteners to your animations. It's about additional flexibility. And also if you wanted to, like I said, add any music or narration, all that's done in After Effects. If you had an audio file, you would simply import it into your scene just like you import anything else. So you go Import, File. You would select your audio file and you drag it into the timeline. Now when you're ready to, excuse me, when you're ready to output your animation, what you want to do is go to the very end. And right up here, this is called your work area bar. And if I select that work area bar and press N, notice what that did is that condensed this bar down to my very last second in the animation. What that means is when I render this animation out, it's only going to render what's included in here. So if you go to Composition, Make Movie, what this will allow you to do is output your animations into different formats. So what you would do is click here on this option. Right where it says Output Module, it'll have a preset. And you could select your format. So if you wanted to do QuickTime, FLV, if you're trying to bring something over into Flash, you could output JPEG sequences. You could do MPEG-4, Windows Media. If you wanted to just output the audio, you could do WAV. Generally, I work with QuickTime and I output to H.264, which is a decent form of compression. Okay, and then you also have the option to include audio. If you don't have audio in your scene, all you would have to do is uncheck that, press OK, and if you click Output To, you can choose where you want that to go. So you press Render, and it will go through and render out your animation. and that would output your final video to the desktop, and here it would be, and you could play it back or send it on to your client for your final presentation. Okay, so that's pretty much wrapping up what I wanted to show you today as far as how you can use After Effects. And like I said, for most of your internal presentations, you probably wouldn't need something like this. But if you wanted to add a little bit of something extra to your animations, like I said, this is a good place to do that. You can also do things like add animated notes. You can add animated arrows if you wanted to show, say, maybe direction of airflow, like on this particular fan. And we do have another poll here for you. And basically, all these webinars we do are meant to teach you guys things that are going to help you do your jobs better. So any feedback that we can get on things that you would like to learn, or if these webinars are useful, they definitely help us determine what concepts we're going to teach you in the future. So please send us feedback, and if you have any subjects that you would like us to cover in the future, we'd be more than happy to do so. Okay, first question is how to import a TIFF sequence again. And while we are covering that, excuse me, sorry, I'll cover a few more things about importing and working with footage. And so there's two ways to import a TIFF sequence. And what I can do is go into the KeyShot renderings folder. Or KeyShot animations folder. And in there, let's see here. Okay, so what you can do, one of two ways, you can drag and drop your folder with your frames in there. So if you look in here, I have this laptop sequence that we started out with that basically showed the laptop opening up. So if I click on this folder and I drag and drop it into the product or the project window, it's going to automatically recognize that all the images in that folder are sequenced, and it will bring it in as footage. Okay. The other way you can do it is you can go to File, Import, and you can select File, and you select the first image in the sequence. If you don't have this TIFF sequence option checked, it's not going to import the entire sequence. It's going to import the very first image, and that's it. So if you are trying to import this, you'll want to make sure that TIFF sequence is selected. Press Open, and it will bring it in. Now, this section here, this little prompt talks about alpha channels. Generally, you're going to want to just keep this as pre-multiplied, and that will help when you're trying to put your rendered frames on top of different colored backgrounds. Now, the other thing you can do, if you look up here on this footage information, this says it's 800 by 450, it's 25 frames long, and it's loaded at 30 frames per second. Now, I rendered this out of KeyShot at 24 frames per second, but After Effects brought it in at 30, and that's just by default. So because these are just a set of images, After Effects has no idea whether it was 12 frames per second, 24, 30, or 60. So what you have to do is you have to tell it what you want it to actually be. So if you right-click on this, select Interpret Footage, and go to Main, right here it says Assume this frame rate. So if I know that I rendered this out at 24 frames per second, you can press 24, press OK, and that will now interpret it at 24 frames per second. The other thing you can do is once you have your footage in here, if I drag it from the project window on top of this little button, this will automatically put it into a new composition with the correct duration. So this is the entire duration of the animation, and it sets that up for you automatically. Okay, how are we doing on questions? Are there any other questions that we had come up? Okay, all right. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate you stopping by and checking out the webinar today. And yeah, we do. Oh, actually, before I go, there was one other thing I wanted to show you guys. Now, I realized that for a lot of you, this might have been the first time that you've seen After Effects today, and I do understand that that probably could have been a lot of information to dump on you. Fortunately, there's a really great resource out there, and it's one of the places that I first got started with After Effects, and that's videocopilot.net. This is a really amazing resource. Very talented guy by the name of Andrew Kramer, who posts all these tutorials for free. And actually what he has on this particular site is a section called Basic Training. So if you click right here on Basic Training, if you go to videocopilot.net/basic, it covers, he's got 2 hours of instruction here that cover all the basics of After Effects. So, I mean, you'll get a really good solid foundation if you go check out this site, and that will really help you with, like I said, adding a little bit of something extra to any of the animations that you may be doing. And after you get through all these basics, he has a ton of tutorials that cover even more advanced effects as well. So definitely a great resource to check out. Also, we'll be posting our webinars on the KeyShot site. And if you go to View Past Webinars, this is where we post all our webinars, so you can view this for your future reference. Also, with this particular webinar, I'll be including the source files, so I'll include the After Effects project along with the mats and things that I created to put this all together. So thank you all again, and like I said, if you have any feedback on things that you would like to learn in the future, please let us know, because like I said, we do these so we can help you guys do your jobs better. So please let us know. All right, thanks everyone, and we look forward to seeing you next time.